عليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful. And may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Brothers, sisters, respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to this second lecture, second discussion on our new topic, our most recent topic, this one having to do with the afterlife. So as you remember, what we tried to establish in the previous lecture is that understanding the topics that fall under the general theme of the afterlife, the hereafter, alam al-akhirah, is of the utmost importance in itself, because it constitutes one of the main pillars of our existential understanding of the world. So when we say, for instance, that a human being has a certain worldview, that worldview is basically based usually on the three big questions, the three pillars, which are: where do I come from, what am I doing here, and where am I going? And the topic of where am I going, the final outcome, takes a completely different type of importance, not only because of itself, because it allows us to understand, there is a curiosity, there is an intellectual component to this, but there's also a very practical component. Basically, depending on how we answer that question, we are going to live a very different life, or we're supposed to live a very different life. The more we understand what may await us in the afterlife, the more it's going to become the directing principle for all of our actions. It's going to be that thing which orients, which gives meaning to everything we decide to do or not to do. And so when we spoke about the worldview, when we began this entire series, we said that once you have a worldview, then every action and every non-action that you perform as a human being is going to be entirely dependent on that worldview. So worldview is a lot more important than your practical actions, because it's what's going to give them meaning. It's what's going to give them direction or orientation. So I think this topic in itself has been sufficiently understood, sufficiently explained. So now, today, inshallah, we're going to start with the subtopics or the headings that fall under the topic of the hereafter, the afterlife, beginning with, as we said, one of the biggest themes or headings under the hereafter, the afterlife, alam al-akhirah, which is trying to understand the soul. So this lesson, the manner in which it's explained or entitled in the curriculum we're following, is the link between the afterlife and the soul. So there's definitely a link, and here we are going to try to establish the first part of that link. If you remember, we said, there's going to be a couple of lectures on the topic of the soul. So this is going to be the first of them, and there's going to be the second one, the one that will follow this one, that directly address the soul and the nature of the soul, the nature of the relationship between the soul and the body, and why it's important. And today, inshallah, we're going to try to understand why it's important to spend a little bit of time on this, why this is relevant. And then under some of the other topics that we're going to address in this general course on the afterlife, we are still going to be talking about the soul, just not directly, but we're going to need what we're going to say here in the rest of the lectures as well. So the overview of the lesson, the manner in which it's built, basically two parts to this lesson. The first part has to do with what the author calls the criteria that allows us to say that a certain living organism or an entity has unity, that it is one. And we're going to explain that in a second. Why is that a question and why is that important? The second part of the lesson is going to be about the place of the soul in a human being. In other words, and I'm trying to stick as closely as possible to what's in the curriculum, but in other words, what we're trying to see is what is the relationship between a human being and the soul, especially given the first part of the lesson, which has to do a lot with the body. So what's the relationship between body and soul, and where does the human being lie in there? Okay, so at first glance, when you look at this, one may say, well, what's the issue here? Why are we spending time talking about the soul, as interesting as it may be in itself, by itself as a topic? Why are we spending time on this? And there's two ways to look at this. One way is to say the point of this lesson is to answer an objection, or to provide kind of a negative argument. So to say what it is not, the soul, because we're going to need that for everything we're going to say afterwards. And so here the point, sorry for giving it to you and selling the punchline right from the beginning, but the soul, or there's a part of the human being that is non-material. Okay, so that's what we're trying to establish here. So it's kind of the proof by the negative, what it is not. There's a second way to understand this lesson, and this is when you look at the overall plan of these lessons, is that we are going to encounter a big objection that human beings generally have, that human beings have generally used to oppose the teachings of the prophets, to go against the teachings of the prophets, when they continuously reject or object by saying, how is it possible that a human being or an entity that ceases to exist is going to come back to life, which is the afterlife? So either you're saying that this entity is the same, or it is not. If it is the same, then we saw it disappear, we saw it go to nothingness, so how can it come back? And if it is not the same, if it's being created, it's a new creation, then why does it deserve any reward, any punishment, any whatever awaits it in the afterlife? So you have to keep that in mind, and that gives a little bit more relevance to what we're saying here, because we're putting in place the premises so that we're going to clearly be able to answer this question once we reach it much later in this series. So different ways of understanding how this lesson fits into the bigger picture, but there's definitely a bigger picture. So today we're just starting the topic, and as we said, and we've repeated multiple times, this is an introductory class, so don't expect us to go into much advanced technical details here, but generally speaking, we are going to provide the bottom line answer to this topic, or let's say the classic presentation of this topic. So on to the first part of the lesson, as we said, which is trying to understand what's the criteria, what is the way in which we can say that an entity, the main factor that allows us to say that an entity is one or not one. What allows us to say that this being remains one despite the changes that we are going to see? That's the main question we're trying to answer in part one. So if we look at, generally speaking, our concern is a human being, so we can concentrate on the human being, or we can look at animals in general, entities, living entities in general. We know that they are made up of living bodies, and these living bodies are made up of smaller organs, and those organs are made up of smaller parts until you reach the level of the cell, which looks like what is the main kind of separate functional entity that once you put them together, you can get organs and parts, and then you get the full organism. So when you look at the constituting parts, let's say it's the cells, you look at them, when you look at a living body, you're going to see that those cells are not going to remain the same from the moment that entity is going to be in existence from beginning to end. And this is well known. If you look at a human being, you're going to see that we have different types of cells in our bodies. We have cells that live even a few hours and they die in our bodies. We have cells that live a few days. We have cells that live a few weeks, a few months, and years. And the cells that are well known, and I'm not going to get into this big topic right now of neurogenesis, but the cells that live the longest are the neurons. So in the past, they used to think that the neurons are basically the cells that you need to learn and to think. They form your a large part of your brain, and that's what you need to really learn things and think at a certain higher level. And those are the ones that are going to remain with you your entire life. So whatever you're born with, you're going to be dying with. And more recently, in the past few years, since the 60s, basically, research has picked up, and they're doing a lot of research on this. And it's still a controversial topic whether it's clear that they die, but the ability to regenerate new neurons or not is still being discussed. Apparently there's a close link with stem cell research and the fact that there are parts of your brain that may send new cells to become neurons as the body needs them, as you need to learn, for instance, and so on and so forth. That entire topic aside, if you look at a human being, let's say we're made up of skin, and we're made up of bones and muscles and organs, and that perform different functions, and all of these are made up of cells. And depending on which one you're looking at, all of these cells are going to die and be replaced by other cells at any given point in your life. So if you look at an entity like this, where all the parts are going to be dying and changing and being replaced with time, then what gives you the right, when each one of these cells is disappearing, is being replaced, and the numbers are fluctuating depending on when you're looking at them in your life, what gives you the right to say that, let's say at year one, you're looking at the same entity as you're looking at when you're looking, let's say 20 years later or 60 years later? And we need an answer to this question. Are we still looking at the same entity, the same living being, or are we looking at a completely different being when all the parts have been changed and replaced? And so here the answers are going to vary. Given all of these changes, how do we say that we're still dealing with one unit, with the same entity, that this entity has unity? What puts that unity together? So if you want to look at it from only the body, from only the materialist component, the physical component, the answer that has been given, the best answer that's been given, is that at any given time, let's say you were to take a snapshot in different points in time, you're going to see that there's an overlap between some of these cells. So there is no point in time when you look at the cells here and the cells here, and you're going to say that there was never any connection. There's an overlap. So as the cells change, some of them are still making that connection. And it's not happening that, you have all the cells at one point and then you get rid of all of them and you have a completely new batch of cells. No, some of them are going away, but some of them are staying. And when you get the new ones, other ones are going away. So this allows the unity of that being to remain in place. Okay, so that's kind of been one of the best answers given to this, but, as the author tells us, this has really not been very convincing. Because let's say you take the example of a building, and that building is made up of bricks. And someone comes every day and they change a few bricks. And so with time, you start seeing that although the building may still look the same, may still seem to be standing in the same location, what you know for a fact is that every single brick in here is gradually being changed. And at one point when you're going to come, you're going to know that every single brick has been replaced by a new brick. So at the end, when you look at this, unless you want to use some sort of fallacy or metaphoric language, or the truth is you no longer have the same building that you had in the beginning. This is a completely new building, although it may be standing in the same place and it may look the same. So if this is what we're saying that's happening to a human body, let's say, or even an animal, but we're concerned with a human being, then how can we say at the end of such a process where every part is being replaced that we're still dealing with the same entity? And here the answer that was given is that, well, this is different. You can't really use an example, let's say from the physical world like we just did with a building, because the force that is making this change, that is exercising this change, is coming from the outside. It's not an organic force. If this were to be an internal, natural, organic process, then you would see that we're still talking about the same. So basically we're dealing with apples and oranges here. We can't really compare what's happening to the building with what's happening inside the body of a human being. Okay, so here, the counter to this is not to say, no, this is not convincing. We'd say, okay, can we please explore this internal organic nature of the process? We want to understand what is it that's allowing you to say, in this case, let's say the case of the building, we no longer have the same building. But when we go to the human being or a living entity, we're going to say that no, this is still the same entity as we had before because of its nature, because of the organic process, the natural process that we have internally happening. Now, here is where the author says, he takes us back a little bit in history, and he tells us, you know, the philosopher have said. So here, as a reminder from me, that this is based on more classic falsafa, classic Islamic philosophy, and philosophy in general. A lot of this actually comes to us from Greek philosophy even, but the arguments are the same, and you know, they've built on them and they've made them a lot more sophisticated and accurate with time, but it's still kind of the same argumentation. And so classic philosophy tells us that when you look at an entity, when you look at something that has, especially if something has life, that is made up of parts, and those parts change with time, there is something that seems to remain even though a lot of the parts, if not all the parts, are changing. So we know for a fact that even though that change is happening, even though the parts are being replaced, something allows you to say that this is still the same entity. We all know that this is still the same entity, but we just can't put our finger on it, let's say physically or materially. What is it that allows me to say it's the same? And this is where they introduce this notion, this the heading or the term of surah or tabi'ah in Arabic. So basically this translates as the form or the nature of the thing. So this form or nature of a thing is what remains even though the parts change, but they don't change like a building would change with all the bricks. There is something behind that is allowing you to say that, no, this is still the same entity, even though the physical parts are changing. So what we're talking about has to be something simple that you cannot divide, and we're going to talk about that later. It has to be something that is non-material, and it has to be something that is not going to be changing in the philosophical sense, not something that you can destroy in this manner, something that comes and goes into existence. Okay, so when you put all of this together, what we're really talking about, and this is the term that the philosophers use, they are talking about a nafs. So this is something, you know, I'll say just as a quick remark, for any of you guys who are, you know, embarking on, you know, lectures or lessons in Islamic sciences, be very careful that when you use the terms, make sure that you're using them in the right way, in the right science, in the right field. You know, if you say nafs in akhlaq, it has a completely different meaning than you say nafs in falsafa, okay? Which may be even a different meaning than, for instance, someone who wants to say this is a ruh. Okay, so it depends on which field you're referring to, then it's going to have a different meaning. Okay, but that's just a side remark, and we go back to the lesson. So what the philosophers have said is that this tabi'ah or the surah, the underlying reality behind it, they refer to as nafs. So this nafs is going to be what allows you to say that this thing has unity. It constitutes one identity, one unit, one singularity, even though the parts in it are changing. So when I look at a living entity, when I look at, to know that something has a nafs or not, I look at its faculties. If it has certain faculties, then I have to say that it has a nafs. This is what allows it to be living. So for instance, the basics for the nafs for anything that is alive is that its ability to, and these are obviously correlated, and we're not going to go into the details here, but the ability, for instance, to have nutrition, that something comes in and then that you get development and growth, and then you get reproduction, and we're going to get into the more sophisticated in a second. But these are the basics of the nafs. Okay, so this is obviously going to apply based on classic falsafa. This is going to apply to the plant world, which is sometimes referred to as the mineral soul or the vegetative soul. And then you have the animal soul or the animus, and then you have the human being soul. Okay, that's kind of the general theory. Now, if you go into, again, continuing with the classic falsafa, with the classic philosophers, they're going to be splitting in two categories the types of nafs that exist. If you go in more, you know, older times, more ancient times, the majority of the thinkers, and that includes the majority of the Greeks and then early Muslim philosophers, they used to say that if you look at an animal and a plant, the faculties that they have, although they are nafs, those faculties are in fact material. You can explain them with material explanations. You can give a materialist interpretation to what is happening here. Okay, so this continued all the way to the time, the 16th century, with Mullah Sadra, who really is the one to really establish that, no, even the animals, you cannot explain everything that's going on with purely materialist interpretations. So in the old times, they used to say the plants and the animals are one category, and you can explain everything through material means, through materialist interpretations and explanations. And then you have the human being soul, which is the only thing that is immaterial, entirely immaterial, non-material. When Mullah Sadra came, he clearly established that no, the animals too are going to have to require a nafs that is non-material. And here we have a gradation that he introduced. And so based on this, your understanding of this gradation, the case can easily be made that this can be generalized to plants too, which is, you know, a side note. We don't need to spend too much time on this. But basically, your ability to have sensation as a creature, that you can sense, that you have awareness, that you have a will. So the more of these you have, the more immaterial you need to be, because those are the parts that are entirely non-material in you. So if it were to be established that plants have a will, but it's very, very limited or very weak, that plants have awareness and sensation, but it's very, very weak as compared to a human being, then you would also understand their nafs in this manner too. Okay, so it all depends on, you know, this is kind of the more sophisticated falsafa proofs and arguments and discussions that are there. Okay, so we don't need to spend too much time on this. The bottom line from all of this is that for these faculties to be there in an entity, that even though that entity, when you look at it, it may seem to be physical, there is an immaterial component to it that needs to be in place to allow you to explain the will, the awareness, and the sensation of that entity. And that is that immaterial thing is now the nafs that we're talking about, or the one that we use in our more theological terminology as the ruh. Okay? So this is, as we said, this was the main explanation to the question. So then how do we explain? How do we explain that we are still dealing with the same entity? This is the explanation that has been given by, let's say, classic falsafa and onwards from Mullah Sadr, Sadruddin Shirazi, and others. Okay, on the other side, you have the materialists. And the materialists have always, throughout history, if you look at the intellectual history of humanity, there have always been materialists, and they have generally rejected anything that is non-material, that is non-empirical. This took a completely different, you know, twist, and they came with a vengeance since the positivist philosophy. So basically, positivist philosophy is, you know, this idea that for me, it's a very epistemological philosophy. It's really based on what I can know. It's based on the theory of knowledge. So I'm not so concerned with what exists and what doesn't. I'm concerned with what I can know. The only things positivists will tell you, the only things that I should be concerned with are the things that I can know for sure. And the only things that I can know for sure are the things that can be proven scientifically, in other words, through our empirical means. So I have to see it, I have to taste it, I have to smell it, I have to touch it. Otherwise, it's nonsense. And so I will not be concerned with it. That's basically the crux of positivist thinking, or what the author has referred to as the neo-materialists, the new materialists. So he says the new materialists have basically rejected anything and everything that is non-material. So they reject all of the explanation that has been given, that we just gave, to explain how something, let's say a living entity, even though every part of it is changing, it can still hold its unity together. And we can still refer to it, and of course this applies to us. How can I say that I am still the same person when clearly every part of me has been changing, has been replaced over, let's say, 50 years or 80 years that I've lived? Then how can I say that this is still the same person? So the materialists, especially the positivists, or the neo-materialists as the author says, they're going to completely reject any non-materialist explanation. And so he is right in here in his, very quickly he says, and so therefore they have no explanation. A purely materialist thinker is not going to have any explanation for the unity of a living creature. And so he says that very quickly, and someone might think, well, this is a reduction, it's not true, they have an explanation. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Just keep that in mind. It's an important point, and he doesn't really spend too much time on it. I think, unfortunately, he should have spent a little bit more time, because this is truly one of the, I think, the keys that we have to keep in mind in present day discussion about, the immateriality of the soul and so on and so forth. We'll come back to this towards the end of the lesson. All that to say, so he says, so if you are a positivist, if you are basically a materialist thinker, your belief system, your worldview is entirely materialist, then you do not have any explanation for how a living entity is going to maintain its unity, its identity. And so here, he goes back to explaining that in the old times, if the distinction, especially since Mullah Sadr has been with plants on one side and the others on the other, so animals and human beings on the other side, so plants would have an entirely materialist set of faculties, even though they are living, but because they have no awareness, that used to be the old mentality, there's no awareness, there is no will at all in plants. So because of that, then you cannot say that there's any immaterial component to them. It would mean that when you're looking at the plant with time, you cannot really say that they have unity, that you're looking at the same plant. The plant has completely changed with time, okay? Which is not the same thing as you would say for an animal or a human being. But as I said, this does not really apply as is. It's not as simple as that. Even if we apply their own criteria, I think there's a case to be made that, plants even have a certain amount of sensation, awareness, and will, most likely. Any case. So as we said, this is not the point. So if we continue with at least the part that is recognized by, the majority of those who have spoken about this, they're going to tell us that in the case of all animals, and especially in the case of human beings, the case is very, very clear that there is a unity. We are dealing with the same entity, so long as this entity is going to remain as one identity, and as it has this underlying part to it, then we are dealing with one unit. We are dealing with one singularity, despite all the changes that are taking place, that are occurring to the parts of that entity. So one thing that we establish very clearly is that there is unity. The second thing we can establish right away based on all of this is that if tomorrow we would say this entity ceases to exist, the body of that entity, all those parts cease to exist, then it would most likely mean that that entity would remain there. And this opens the door to the existence of that part into beyond in time, beyond what the body's existence is going to be. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in a second. We haven't really gotten there. Okay, so this is what he's trying to establish here, is that first of all, we explain how this entity, with all of its changing, replaced parts, is going to remain the same. That's the unity. That's the main factor. That's the main piece of evidence, ingredient that we are going to need to explain how a thing is actually the same as it was, say, 50 years ago, or even 200 or 1,000 years ago, despite what we're going to say. For instance, that you die and you go underground and your body decomposes, okay? Despite what happens, that entity has remained the same because there's something else in there that explains that identity. Okay, that's what we're trying to establish. And secondly, once that body changes or loses its faculties, or some of its faculties, or all of its faculties, that entity is still there. And if that entity is still there, then that entity is going to remain in existence even though the body is not going to be there. Okay, so that's kind of what he's saying. If we go to the materialist interpretation of the unity, so you want to explain the unity of an entity in any other way that does not lead you to these conclusions, then you are going to have a very big problem with the afterlife. What happens after you die? Can something still happen after you die? What type of existence is awaiting you? So of course, this is kind of, as we said, this is an introductory class. This is the classic presentation of this. There are many, many different theories, but we're presenting the one that is kind of the most accepted by the majority and with the clearest proofs and the easiest proofs to understand. So any conclusions, any kind of thinking that would lead you to not have this, one, the unity of the entity, and two, the possibility of its existence after the body has disappeared, then you are going to be ending up having a incorrect belief about the afterlife. And the author's main point, as we said, especially in the last lesson, and this is going to be a continuing theme, is that we want to establish, we want to build a correct foundation for our belief in the afterlife. So here, for instance, if you were to say, let's say in the afterlife you get a new body, what happens then? Can you answer the question of reward and punishment if you were to get a completely new body? What if you get the same body where all the faculties have disappeared and then they were brought back to you? Can we still get an afterlife with reward and punishment or not? And so this, once you've established that first part, which is there is an underlying part that is going to allow you to explain the identity, the unity of the thing, and is going to explain very clearly that you can have that entity continue to exist in the future, even though the body may not be there. If you can have those two, then you're not going to run into problems regardless of where you go afterwards, okay? And otherwise, you are going to run into problems. So if you say you're going to get a new body, you're going to have a problem. If you say you're going to get the same body, but the faculties have completely gone and you recreate them, you have other problems, okay? So the conclusion from all of this, what do we conclude? The conclusion from all of this is that the soul is a separate entity from the body and its faculties. The soul is not one of the faculties of the body, and the soul is not the body, okay? It's something different. Because if it is part of the body, because if it's part of the faculties of the body, we're going to run into the same problems of what is being replaced and why is it not being replaced like everything else. Two, the soul is not a material form that resides in the body. It's not something material. It cannot be something material, okay? So what we need from the soul, to put it very bluntly and deconstruct it and give the keys to this. One, that there has to be a soul that exists. Just the existence of the soul itself, without anything else. That's one. This needs to be established. Two, that the soul is what he refers to in the book as al-jawhar. It's a jawhar. It's an essence. It's an essence in itself. What's an essence? If you look at the world in philosophy, and there's might be kind of more ancient terminology that we use, but it's still valid. And in some ways of teaching philosophy, they still use that. Sometimes they use different terminology for it. There are things that exist as entities in themselves in the world, and there are other things that cannot exist as an entity in itself. If I look, let's say, at the color blue, blue does not exist in itself in the world. Blue is always something that carries blueness, that can have the blue in it. Blue cannot exist as just blue. It's something that you abstract, right? Or let's say, and we don't want to look at it from something you abstract, it's more an accident. They refer to it as a arab. They refer to it as something that cannot exist in itself, so it must be carried by something else. If you look at fear or anger or our emotions or bravery, well, these are not things that can exist in themselves, but they can be accidents, things that may occur. They may be carried by, say, a human being. So a human being may be described as, acting with bravery or having bravery or being brave. But bravery in itself does not exist. It's not an essence. It's an accident, to use a terminology in philosophy. So the soul, is it an accident? Is it a arab? Or is it a jawhar, an essence? So clearly, one, it exists, and two, it exists as an essence. That's two. Three, this is an essence that exists separately from the body. Okay, whether the body is there or not, that essence is going to be able to exist. It does not need the body to exist. Okay, so this is what the conclusion of everything that he has said until now is. Now he goes into the second topic or the second part of the lesson. And this one is very quick. We want to understand what's the place of the soul in the human body. What's the position? What's the importance? What's the role or the relationship between all of these parts that we just described? And here it's almost like there's an objection that he doesn't talk about, but now we just said, based on everything we said, that a human being is made up of a body, clearly, we all see that, and then there's a soul. So if the body is made up if the human being is made up of these different parts, what's the relationship between them? Because if you say that the human being is made up of a body and a soul, but the soul is one of the faculties of the body, then you're going to have a problem. Because the moment that body disappears, all of its faculties go away with it. And if you're going to say that you need both, then you're going to have a problem too. And so this is where he tells us the relationship between the body and the soul is not like the relationship, say, of a chemical composition, a chemical compound. So he gives us the example of water. So say you have H2O, you have hydrogen and oxygen in certain quantities and a certain way put together. And this gives you water, okay? So we're not going to go into the topic of irreducible complexity, but if you put these together in a certain way, you get water. The moment one of the ingredients goes away, you're no longer going to have water. So if you have that type of relationship where, just like a chemical compound, it is made up of these different parts, these different ingredients, and one of them goes away, then the whole thing goes away, you are going to have a problem with the case of, let's say, the human being. That's exactly what it is not. That's why he said that the soul exists as a separate essence, as a separate entity in itself. Okay? And so the conclusion of all of this is that to understand properly the place of the soul for the human being, the position that the soul holds for a human being, or the relationship of the human being with the soul and the body, is that the humanness, your humanity, for the humanness of your humanity, the nature of who you are, is entirely dependent on your soul, not your body. Your body becomes secondary. What you are is your soul, and you also get to have a body when you come into this world. And then you can leave this world without the body, and you are still the same you. You are still the same I. You can refer to yourself still as the same I, even though there may not be a body. That's one. And two, as we said, the soul is going to entirely define your unity. So what holds you together as an entity in time, despite all the changes that may or may not occur to you, especially your body, all the changes that may happen, and still you are still you, this you is only and entirely defined by your soul. So the soul defines your unity, and the soul defines your humanness. Your humanness is not defined, and I'm intentionally using this term because I think it's better understood. Your humanness is defined entirely by your soul, not your body. Your body is an addition to it, it's secondary. Okay, so this is kind of the conclusion of everything we've said. And here the author tells us this is all based on our rational approaching to this topic. And if we were to go back, let's say, to the scripture, to the Holy Quran, there are also multiple instances where this is very clear. And one of them, so he quickly mentions this, and he doesn't mention the whole verse, but I think if we put those two verses together, the point that the Holy Quran is making here becomes a lot clearer. So this is an objection to which the Holy Quran is answering. Notice how it's said so that you don't miss it. The Holy Quran in Surah As-Sajdah 32, it says, and they say, when we have been lost in the earth, or when we have disappeared in the dust, so after we've died and our bodies have decomposed, when we have been lost in the earth, shall we indeed be created anew? Rather, they disbelieve in the encounter with their Lord. Say, the angel of death put in charge of you will duly take you back, then to your Lord shall you be returned. What is the angel taking? Obviously, the angel is not taking your body. Your body is going into the ground and it's decomposing. So what is the angel taking back? What is this yatawaffa? Tawaffi is what? Tawaffi is taking back. When you take something back completely, this is literally what it means to do wafat or tawfiyah or tawaffa. يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ مَلَكُ الْمَوْتِ. When the malak, the angel of death who has been made in charge of you, is going to take you back entirely. يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ. What is he taking back entirely? If the body is going into the ground and disappearing, what is the angel taking back? He's taking back the soul and bringing it to where it's going to be in a completely different relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with this world. So it's being released from the body that it's in, to understand it this way, although it's not as simple as that. So this is kind of, generally speaking, what's covered in this lesson. And I'm trying to cover it quickly. So yes, there might be some more abstract, slightly more nuanced notions presented in this lesson, but I think the general argument is quite clear and simple. So someone just needs to kind of follow attentively, but the lesson itself, I don't want to overcomplicate it with what's not in it. So generally speaking, what we've established now is, one, the importance of understanding that there is a soul, the nature of that soul, the nature of the relationship with the body, between the body and the soul, and what really constitutes your unity and your humanness. Okay, so this is what we've established now. But the second part of this entire discussion is going to be addressed in the next time when we are going to meet, inshallah, and where the, let's say, the more rational proofs are going to be presented for the immateriality of the soul. In what sense is the soul immaterial, and what are the best proofs for it? Okay, so that's kind of, generally speaking, what we had to cover for this lesson. Now I wanted to add a couple of points in addition to what's covered in this lesson. So consider these my final remarks on this lesson. First of all, this is a topic that is one of the main topics that are discussed in a higher level or more advanced philosophy. So there's certainly a lot more to be said, and I think anyone who's interested, who has had an interest in this topic, knows that, how much more we can say and how much more detail we can get into, even if we're just relying on the classic version of the philosophy. So, whether you're studying the more intermediate to advanced works of philosophy, the Manzuma of Sabzawari or others, gigantic works have been written on Ilm al-Nafs al-Falsafi, what it means. It might be interpreted as the psychology, but it's not the psychology. It's understanding what is the soul and the relationship between the soul and the body. And then you go into the higher level philosophy, which is Mullah Sadra's interpretation or theory as it's presented in his Asfar. Okay, so this is kind of, entire volumes have been written on interpreting, explaining, commenting on that entire theory. So one point just to keep in mind, another very, very deep topic that has been addressed very technically in a lot of works. So that's point number one. Point number two here is, let's say this is more of my personal 2 cents that I'm adding and I'm sharing with you. If you go through the main works of theology that we currently have, you cannot have, as a preliminary premise that we have to keep in mind, you can't have a real discussion on the afterlife, the hereafter, the alam al-akhirah, without addressing the topic of the immateriality and the eternity of the soul. Okay, so that's very clear. And there are no works that kind of neglect that. That's for sure. The problem is in the majority of the cases, I feel that the topic really requires and needs a good update. It requires a renovation. It's not that the arguments that we have nowadays are entirely new. But unless you've covered it at an advanced level, you may be lost or confused when you hear some of the newer objections or the way that they are objecting to the fact that the soul may be something that is immaterial, that exists, that is immaterial, and that may be eternal. The way the objections are being, formulated against this belief is changing because they're adding a lot of science and a lot of neuroscience into the equation. And when you go back to our works, you see that this is not really something that's been addressed in a lot of detail. Shahid Mutahari has addressed this. Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr in Our Philosophy has addressed this. Sheikh al-Subhani has touched on this for those of you who can read a little bit of Arabic in his Ilahiyat in the 4th volume. He talks about this. And we have other scholars, but none of them have really addressed it in the way that it is being presented in the very contemporary works. And so that's why I thought, you know what, first of all, it's very important that we establish the foundation very clearly, but at least I can give you a couple of pointers for those of you who are interested in looking into this topic a little bit more. So some of the main headings that are all associated with this big topic of the soul, the immateriality of the soul, the eternity of the soul, and what's the relationship. So one of them is the whole topic of altruism, the altruistic behavior. Can we say that when a human being self-sacrifices, whether it's entirely, so you give up your life, or you self-sacrifice only to a certain extent, is it of the same nature as, say, you know, an individual of a species in the animal world, say, you know, an individual that is distracting the, you know, when they're being attacked, he's distracting the prey so that the predator, so that the prey may escape, the others can escape. Is it of the same nature or is it different? So that entire altruistic discussion usually is not really addressed in any of our works, when it is increasingly addressed in more contemporary works. For instance, the detailed relationship between brain and mind is not really addressed in our works. And this is a huge topic. And related to this topic is the entire, you know, to give you a key, I think, is the entire discussion about, you know, mind over matter. And anything that falls in that category. Can the mind do anything without the brain being this, you know, gray matter in your cranium? What is the relationship between the two? Is everything that's happening in the mind the same as everything happening in the brain or not? Are they equal or are they two different things? Okay, so that's another discussion. Entire volumes are written about this right now, and you don't really see a direct addressing of this in any of our works right now, based on what I've seen. Then there is the entire field of what they refer to as behavioral psychology. And, you know, even in the scientific world, some people say that that is not even a scientific field, and others say that it is. But basically, it's entirely based on evolutionary theory and with a twist that is entirely materialistic or materialist. So you explain everything because one individual, you know, 70 million years ago may have done something, and this is the way we are today, and that's why we do everything we do. And so this leads usually to entirely to determinism and the fact that you don't really have any free will. You're wired in a certain way based on your evolutionary biology, based on your genes, based on what your ancestors did, you know, millions of years ago. You are the way you are, end of story. So that's an entire field that usually is not really addressed directly in our works too, but I think it has a direct connection with the soul. And there are other, you know, topics like that. So if anyone is interested in this, I thought I'd just give you a couple of names to start looking into. And I think I'm just, you know, trying to focus on the most well-known ones because everybody knows them, but at least it gives you something to, a point of starting in all of this research if you want to do any. So on the side of those who attack all of this, and they're very, very open in their attacks, and this is where I want to make the link with what the author told us earlier, when he said very clearly, he said, those who are materialist in their thinking, those who are positivist in their thinking, they will not have an explanation for the unity of an entity. If you have a living entity, they will not be able to explain to you how their consciousness is going to tell them, that entity, that they are one. That my I, is the same I 7 years ago as it is today, for instance. That's what he claimed, right? So I'll tell you right now, go to the works of people like Daniel Dennett, Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins, and others, you know, the big names in this field. They will all repeat the same thing. Basically, your feeling, your awareness that you are one, that you have a consciousness, that you have a will, they will openly and directly tell you this is all an illusion. This does not really exist. It is not the case. Your mind is playing a trick on you to make you think that you actually have something called you being conscious, being aware, having a will. All of this does not exist because they are entirely materialist. So go to their works and they represent the biggest names in the field today, and they will openly and directly say this again and again. They've written entire books about this. Okay, so that's on one side. Even people, that's why I'm mentioning this. Sam Harris, he wrote a book when he was still a grad student. Now he has a PhD in neuroscience. But at that time, when he released that book, The End of Faith, he was still doing his grad studies in neuroscience. And in that book, imagine, the book is written to basically make the case that having faith, believing in a religion, is equal to having a mental illness. Okay, that's what he's saying in that book. And, many, many other controversial things. In there, he makes the case, and he was very heavily criticized for this, he makes the case that while he's rejecting religion, he says that there is a case to be made for psi research. So basically parapsychological research. Because he's a neuroscientist and he has seen the science, he cannot just say this is all non-science. He has seen too much evidence that says there is something as, parapsychology that is worth looking into scientifically. Just based on this, he was very heavily criticized and critiqued and attacked. Okay, so anyone who wants to look into this, I'd say I'll give you one book that I thought from everything that I have read, it's one of the books that deconstructs the materialist version of consciousness. So he takes that argument to the end, and he kind of goes at the level of the atoms and what's going on in the neurons and the synapses, and what can we actually explain what's going on with purely materialist interpretations or not, is this book by Raymond Tallis. He's written a number of really good books, I Am, for instance. That's one of his really good books. But the book is called Aping Mankind. So he's written a book. If you have the patience to read a book like this, I found it a very long read compared to, it's not a light read. And the guy is a clinical neuroscientist. He's a retired medical physician. He specializes in geriatrics. He's openly atheist. And at the same time, he's a philosopher. He's against postmodernism and so on and so forth. Very, very interesting thinker. Besides all of this, in this book of Aping Mankind, he really goes into the details, the mechanics of what is going on in your brain when you perceive. And is this enough to call this consciousness, or our experience of consciousness is something completely different that cannot be explained? If this is his case, the case that he's making and arguing, and I think he makes a really good case in it. He explains that it cannot be reduced to the mechanics of what's going on inside the brain. And basically the brain and the mind are two completely different things in all of this. Anyways, inshallah, with this, you have a little bit of a kind of starting points if you want to get into this topic from a point of view that, I think would be a little bit more contemporary, and start looking at the pros and cons and what some of the scientists and thinkers and specialists have written about this. There are many, many others. So just, things to keep in mind if you're interested in this topic and looking into it a little bit more. As we said, the next lecture is going to be dedicated to presenting some of the proofs to clearly establish the immateriality and therefore the eternity of the soul. And then we'll move on to the other topics related to the afterlife. And with this, we have completed our discussion for today. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أحسنتم سيد حبيبي, جزاكم الله خير. There is a question from last week. I'm going to send it now. And then there is a question from Brother Hussein Musa if you have time.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is not directly related to the topic at hand, not the one we discussed today, nor the big general topic of the hereafter, but it's a very interesting question. I feel it's a very philosophical question. So the question is it correct to think that most of us don't have 100% certainty, but we can still be good people, good Muslims, do good deeds, and are trying our best? Where does this fit in regards to the Quran talking about those who don't believe and those who deny go to hellfire? Are some people more prone to doubts and skepticism with no fault of their own? So the short answer to this is yes. as human beings, you have to have that openness that there's always something that you're missing, that there's always more that you can learn. And this is very clear, and it requires a whole separate topic, because the very simple version of the argument is basically that, you know, what we know is what we know. We're 100% sure of this, and there's no doubt about it. End of story. But if that were the case, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today, which is trying to learn more. And this is the importance of learning about our faith based in a way that is actually convincing to us. So when you say 100% certainty, what's going to be convincing to me may not be what's going to be convincing to you. Are people, some people, more prone to skepticism, let's say, or doubts than others? I think so. Absolutely. There's genetic factors, there's the entire upbringing, there's the way you think, there's what you have learned over time. And of course, in a lot of cases, you do need, if you feel that you have more doubt or more suspicions or more skepticism than others, you need to get that fixed, because there's obviously some issue that has an underlying issue that needs to be addressed so that you can actually establish your belief on something a little bit more solid. Doubt is good. Doubt is beneficial and a positive thing when it's a transitory phase to certainty. But doubt, to remain in a state of doubt, no, that's not good at all. It basically paralyzes you. You become an agnostic. You become, it's not a, you know, a praiseworthy position to be in, to remain in doubt. What's the point of doubt? If you have, you know, a good, healthy doubt, it means you're going to give priority to that questioning and do something about it, and go educate yourself, go reach a conclusion about it. And if you do it in the right way, then you can actually build. You build a foundation of beliefs. You start from, okay, what exists and what doesn't? What am I able to know as a human being? What can I rely on to build my, you know, initially my infrastructure, let's call it, for my metaphysical understanding of the world, the theory of being, the theory of knowledge. And then based on that, I'm going to be putting in my belief system. Is it possible that tomorrow Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallahu Faraja comes out and says, those things that you thought were right, actually you had them wrong? Of course it is. And this is why, you know, you need that reliance and that guidance on that other power. Otherwise, we would be able to reach all of these conclusions by ourselves. The best of our scholars, what are they trying to do? They're not trying to, you know, create things out of thin air from their own pockets, as they say, you know, create their own theory. They're trying to go back to the scripture and find what the divine guidance has given us, so that they don't waste time, you know, because of skepticism, because of questioning, because of doubts. But of course, with time, with the complexity of life, this is always getting more and more difficult of a task. And this is where you see the difficulty, the misery, the depressive state we're in when we do not have access to an infallible with us. So long as you do not have access to the infallible, you're always going to remain at the mercy of your own human fallible faculties. And you have to recognize humbly that you have to be open to changing your opinion about a topic if you reach a conclusion that you were mistaken about it. Okay, so that, inshallah, that answers the question.
Ahsantum, Sayid. So I think Brother Hussein, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Sayid.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I hope you're well, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, and you too, inshallah.
I just had two quick questions, like a quick yes or no question and then an actual question. I just want to make sure I understood something right. So animals and plants do have a soul, just of a lesser intensity, right?
Right.
And so the nafs and the ruh are basically the most encompassing version of who we are, but just understood in a different context. But nafs and ruh are, as I clear my question, the nafs and the ruh are the same thing, just understood through a different lens. And it's the most encompassing concept of who we are.
100% correct, yes.
Okay, and the main question that I wanted to ask, that I was wondering if people like materialists can use the same argument we're using. Someone can say, Brother Zaid, he's become better and he's growing, his soul is changed, like he's becoming a better person, and therefore his soul is changing. But yet we still recognize his singularity and he still remains recognizable as the same person, even though a person can change. Well, could that not same argument be used for the body? the body is either getting bigger or smaller, stronger or weaker. Yet in the same way we can recognize the soul as it changes, can we not also just recognize, no, it is the same body, but it's just changing?
So the short answer to this is that philosophically, when they say something is changing or not, they're talking about something that exists and ceases to exist.
Okay.
So in this case, that's why, inshallah, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the next lecture. But it's basically, it's kind of like saying the soul is indestructible, whereas the body is. So you could destroy the body and you're done with it, but the soul is not. It doesn't decompose into parts. It's not made up of parts, and it doesn't cease to exist, therefore. There's nothing that's going to change it from existence to non-existence. So it's more related to the notion of huduth, coming into existence or not. Yeah.
So maybe my question is wrong, because the soul does change, but the body gets replaced. When a Sayid dies out, so a body does not change, but it is dying and growing and reborn, and the sins are continually rejuvenating. So I guess that's the word I would use. The soul changes, but the body doesn't. It gets replaced.
Completely correct. Yes.
Okay.
So
okay.
the
Thank
change.
You,
So the change of the soul, if it's done in a healthy way, in the correct way, it basically develops. It's like it's growing.
Right,
so the soul, what you're born with and what you die with, it's basically you reach the perfection or the completion of that cycle, of that journey that you're supposed to have. It's like a plant, a seed that grows all the way to finally giving you the fruit at the end. That's the point of your soul's journey in this world. That's what's supposed to happen if you do it in a healthy way. So the change is there all the time, but it's not the change in the sense that it ceases to exist.
Okay. Thank you, Sayid. I appreciate it.
Development cycle.
Thank you, Sayid.
Thank you very much.
There's a question from Sister Zainab, I think, Sayid.
So once someone dies, could they be reincarnated by God's will? Of course. Especially, so this could mean two things. The question could mean, could they be reincarnated in this world? And yes, they can be. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gives us examples of this, that they have been brought back from the dead themselves into the same situation. And, Uzair or someone else, this may have happened to them. And Surah Al-Baqarah, it talks about, الذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية قال أن يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها. So he goes through a town, he sees that it's all empty and dead, and he says, how or why or when would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise, or in what way would he raise all of this back from the dead? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him die, and then he came back to life 100 years later, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed him what has happened to him, and then what has happened to his food, and then what happened to the mule, the donkey that he was riding, which had completely decomposed. Its body had decomposed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought it back to life in front of him. Or the same thing with the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. So when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam did ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show him how he raises the people back from the dead, so he raised them back from the dead. So these are examples, and there are many others. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly saying, this is in this world. And as for the next world, that's the entire point of the next world, of course, that we are going to be resurrected. So I think that's one part of, one way of understanding the question. The other one is, reincarnated as in, one entity existing, being hosted in, let's say right now, I exist in this body. Could I exist in another body? And this is a controversial topic. Generally speaking, a lot of our thinkers have said no. But then again, it's kind of impossible for the soul to act in itself. So there has to be something for the soul, some material envelope to the soul that allows us to have any impact on the world. And there is some parapsychological studies that are showing that there is a way, for instance, for some of the souls to have an impact on this world. So is it possible? Yes, it's possible on both sides with God's will, of course. So I don't know if I understood the question correctly or not, but if there's more elaboration, I'm happy to take it.
Sister Zainab, do you still have anything? Okay, anyone else? Okay, 1 second. Yeah, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
So you're saying that, like, by God's will, someone could be reincarnated, like, but their soul would move on. They would just be in a different body, or like.
So are you asking the question, is it about the notion of reincarnation as we find, for instance, in other religions, where the soul of someone who's deceased may take on another body? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so generally speaking, all of our scholars say that this cannot happen. This is an impossibility, that a soul of a deceased would come into the body of a new human being, let's say. That does not occur. Or coming back, let's say, in a plant, or coming back in an animal, or that does not occur. That's a classic position. With God's will, of course, anything can happen with God's will. This is, within the realm of the, potentially possible, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could make happen, but based on the scholarship that we have, based on what the philosophy says of how a soul works, this is not how it would work. That a soul could have an impact on this world. So for instance, do something in this world after it has left, that is a possibility. But not through coming back in the body of another human being or a plant or an animal, not in this way. No.
Okay, thank you. Jazakumullah Sayyid.
Allah yakhlikum.
Okay, you want to comment on anything, Sayid, before we finish?
There's one last sentence, but I don't know what it means. There's kind of a fragment of a sentence. There are a lot of occasions where they say, so I'm not sure what that is. I would have commented very quickly on it if I could. So there is, of course, some parapsychological activity, but based on the philosophical underpinnings that we currently have, that all of our scholars use, they say that reincarnation is impossible.
Okay,
So
we'll
there
end
has to be,
maybe
there has to be another interpretation to this.
Yeah. So Brother Muhammad, you're unmuted. We'll end with your comment. Go ahead.
That, like, there's a lot of occasions where they say, like, the
I don't think we can hear you, Brother Muhammad. Can you try again? I think maybe Brother Muhammad is having technical difficulties or something.
So maybe they can, if they can type their question and send it, maybe we can comment on it next week.
Yes, inshallah.
Inshallah.
I know that you said that you have another program in a few minutes, so we want to thank you and Jazakallah khairan. Inshallah, we'll see you next Saturday.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. Fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum.